Who do you think would win in a folk-style wrestling match, Kurt Angle or Gable Steveson? Though Gable himself says he's not the next Kurt Angle, it makes sense that fans have compared them. They're both college wrestlers who won Olympic gold medals and transitioned into the WWE. Of course, Angle is a legendary pro wrestler, while Gable is still an up-and-comer. But who would win in a head-to-head collegiate battle? Well, to properly compare the two, we have to assume that they're both in their prime, because Kurt Angle doesn't even think that he could take on Gable Steveson right now.
I'm too old, brother. I get my handed to me.
And once we assume they're in top wrestling shape, we can then compare the two on 3 different metrics: accomplishments, point margins, and technique. Before we get to that first metric, let's look at their body sizes. So Kurt Angle is 6 foot. He weighed in college about 200 to 220 pounds. There's some variation on that, but needless to say, he was a light heavyweight. If you don't know, in college, 285 pounds is the max for a heavyweight. Gable Steveson is 6'1" and went from 245 to 265 pounds throughout college. He still is not a massive heavyweight, but a bit bigger than Angle. So now let's look back at their career accomplishments. Kurt Angle was a high school state champion from Mount Lebanon, Pennsylvania, whereas Gable was also a state champion, but from Minnesota. In college, the two were very darn similar. Kurt Angle won 2 national titles during his time at Clarion. He also won 4 conference titles. Gable, also a 2-timer, won 3 conference titles in the Big Ten during his time at Minnesota. And it could be said that there are asterisks on each of their college careers. Like Kurt Angle had a knee injury in his sophomore season that really kept him from winning the national title. Gable, on the other hand, competed during the 2020 season, which is notoriously known for having no postseason, where he could have had a 3rd title. And if you think their careers have been similar thus far, wait until we get to international. Gable was a 2-time cadet world champion, a junior world champion, and of course an Olympic gold medalist, having that incredible last-minute takedown of the finals. Kurt, on the other hand, was also an Olympic gold medalist, and if you don't know, he won that medal with a broken neck. He was, the year before that, a world champion. Following his Olympic run, Kurt Angle won Dapper Dan Athlete of the Year, topping other athletes like Jerome Bettis and Mario Lemieux. So based on their accomplishments so far, I have to give the point to Kurt Angle, because he has a senior world title and an Olympic medal, whereas Gable just has the Olympic medal, not any senior world titles so far. Now let's move on to the second metric, which is point margins, or how bad each of these guys beat their opponents. Now there's no full list of opponents that Kurt Angle has wrestled, so I'm really going on the best of the best guys that they've beat. Kurt Angle finished his career with over 100 victories. He was 116, 10, and 2. Even more impressive were his regular season duel meets, where he had over 355 takedowns throughout his career. But what I really want to look at is his performance at the national championships. Did he score any bonus points other than a close decision? Did he have major decisions, tech falls, or pins? And I'll get to that in a second, but first I want to look at Gable's career. He finished 85-2. Those only 2 losses came to the same guy. In the 3 national tournaments that Gable competed in, he won 15 of his 16 matches. And out of those, he won 8 by a bonus point margin. That's a big deficit of 8 or greater points. I mean, there's a reason he's a multiple-time Hodge Trophy winner for the most dominant wrestler of the season. Kurt Angle, on the other hand, won 14 of his 16 national tournament matches, but he won only 1 of those matches by bonus points. And that may seem crazy to think about, but it actually plays more into Kurt Angle's style of wrestling. And I'll get to that technique in just a second. But first, we have to award the point for bonus points to Gable Steveson. So now the score is 1-1, going into our last metric of technique. But as I was analyzing these two guys, I ran into a pretty big issue. I could hardly find any matches, any college matches at least, of Kurt Angle. I know Gable style because I've watched him wrestle, but I wasn't even alive while Kurt Angle was in college. So I went on a search to find somebody who did know about Kurt Angle's technique. And that was actually somebody who wrestled him in the national finals. That's NC State's Sylvester Turkay, who also had a pro wrestling career. And this is what he had to tell me about Kurt Angle's technique.
I guess the way that I would say it, he wrestled more of the classical how would I call it, more the Olympic type of style. Whenever you wear a freestyle and everything, and the way the rest of the world wrestles is more patient style.
I heard he was strong, explosive, and just as quick as Gable.
There were very few people that beat Kurt. Most of my stuff worked on just about everybody else, but whenever I wrestled Kurt, it was a bit different. I was finding that what I was trying to do or to impose my will wasn't working with him.
But the one thing that stood out to me from our conversation was that Angle was a more classical, traditional, like international type of wrestler where he would keep matches really tight. He wasn't necessarily going out there every time to pin guys or turn them and get extra points.
Kurt had really good hips, and that's a rare thing. He can move his side to side motion.
So his hips were good. He was strong, and it was nearly impossible to control him with those big biceps. And even though he was winning by close margins, he was in control of all of those matches. I would also describe Gable's technique as very controlling. He was the dominant man on the mat every single match he was out there. And Kurt Angle even described Gable's technique as turning into a dogfight every time he's on the mat. He called him an incredible athlete with his size and his balance, knowing where he is on the mat at all times. So it seemed in my head that maybe it was leaning towards Gable having the better technique. But there is a bit of recency bias that I had. So I point blank asked Sylvester who had the better technique, Kurt or Gable.
I still would give the edge to Kurt if I had to sit there and put him and take him back in time and he wrestled Kurt or, do the old time travel type of thing. I think Kurt would find a way to win just because, he was that strong and conditioned. He just had, like I said, he had that side movement. He had something that, he had some intangibles about him. That's not taking anything away from Gable Steveson. I mean, that's just a little bit my bias.
And of course, he has a little bit of bias himself, but he had lived through wrestling Kurt Angle. I think he would know a bit better than me. So it seems the point goes to Kurt Angle, giving him 2-1. It seems that Kurt Angle would beat Gable Steveson in a wrestling match, though I'm sure it would be pretty darn close. Oh, and hey, I actually forgot to mention one important thing. If you want more wrestling videos like this, make sure you hit the subscribe button down below to Fanco Wrestling.